The lawyer was still talking when Joel Price opened the door wider so the man could see the garage behind him. The Ferrari sat under two work lights, fully restored, every panel perfect, the prancing horse badge catching the light the way it was designed to. The lawyer stopped mid-sentence. "Tell Miss Marsh I'll be in touch," Joel said. "When I'm ready." He closed the door. That car had cost him $800. What was standing in his garage now was worth somewhere north of $3 million. And the woman whose family had owned it for 30 years had sold it as junk without knowing what she had. That part was not Joel's problem. The bill of sale was legal. The title had transferred. What happened next was entirely up to him. Let's go back to where it started. The estate sale was in Granville, Ohio on a Saturday in late October. Joel had driven 90 minutes for it, not for the Ferrari, which he didn't know was there, but for a set of tools listed in the catalog that had belonged to a machinist in the 1950s. He arrived at 8, bought the tools by 9, and was about to leave when he walked past a detached carriage house at the back of the property. The door was open. Inside, under a canvas tarp that had aged from green to something closer to gray, was a shape that stopped him mid-step. He had spent 11 years as a researcher and authenticator for the Ferrari registry in North America, before his wife Diane got sick and he came home to Granville to raise Cora. He had put his hands on over 200 Ferraris in that decade. He knew the proportions the way a sculptor knew shoulders, the exact rake of a roofline, the specific radius of a rear haunch, the distance between the vent louvers on a long hood coupe. He stood in the doorway of that carriage house and looked at the shape under the canvas for about 4 seconds. Then he walked over and lifted the corner of the tarp. It was a 275 GTB4. 1966 or 67, he couldn't be certain without the chassis number, but the body was unmistakable. The long nose, the fastback, the Pininfarina lines so clean they still looked like the future 60 years later. 2 camshafts per bank. One of the finest road cars Ferrari ever built. Less than 350 had been made. The paint was buried under decades of grime. One headlight surround was damaged. The interior had been mice damaged. The engine was seized. An estate liquidator in an orange vest materialized beside him. "Old Italian sports car," the man said. "We don't have a title for it, but we've got a bill of sale, and the estate attorney says it transfers clean. Honestly, we just need it gone. It's been sitting since the husband passed." Joel kept his face neutral. This was important. "What are you asking?" he said. The liquidator shrugged. 800. "You'd be hauling it yourself." Joel paid cash. He loaded the car on a rented trailer and drove home through the flat Ohio dark with Cora in the passenger seat, asking questions about the shape under the moving blankets he'd used to cover it. She was 9 and she had her mother's instinct for when something mattered. "Is it a good one?" she asked. "It might be a very good one," Joel said. "How good?" He glanced at her. "Go to sleep, Cora." She did not go to sleep. She pressed her nose against the window and watched the road. The garage was warm. Joel backed the trailer in, pulled the moving blankets off, and stood in front of it with the overhead lights on. Cora stood beside him. They looked at it together. "It's pretty," she said. "Even dirty." "Yeah." He crouched by the rear panel. "It really is." He found the chassis number in the door jamb. He photographed it, cross-referenced it against the registry database he still had access to as an emeritus authenticator, and had a result in 11 minutes. The car had been built in late 1966, delivered to a private client in Milan, sold twice in Europe before crossing to the United States in 1981, and purchased at a California auction in 1989 by a man named Robert Marsh. Robert Marsh, husband of Eleanor Marsh, who had died 4 years ago and left his estate, including apparently this carriage house and everything in it, to his widow. Joel closed the laptop. He sat with that information for a long time. Then he walked back to the garage, put his hand on the roof of the 275, and started making a list of what needed doing. The restoration took 4 months. He worked evenings and weekends while Cora did homework at the bench. He sourced parts through the same channels he'd used for 11 years. A specialist in Modena, a restorer in Surrey who knew the GTB4 family better than anyone alive, a machinist in Michigan who could free a seized Ferrari engine without damaging the internals. He spent money carefully. He documented everything. Cora named the car Rosso, which was obvious but correct. By February, the engine ran. By March, the paint, Ferrari Rosso Chiaro. The exact original color confirmed by the registry code in the chassis documentation was done. By April, the interior was rebuilt from period-correct materials. Joel drove it for the first time on a Tuesday morning, alone, before Cora was awake, down the county road and back. He sat in the driveway after, with the engine idling, and thought about Diane, who had never seen this car but would have understood completely what it meant to find it. He submitted the authentication paperwork to the registry the following week. The certificate came back in 12 days. Full provenance confirmed. One of 330 North American specification 275 GTB4s in recorded existence. Matching numbers. Unrestored prior to his work, documentation intact. The registry listed it publicly, as they did all authenticated vehicles, for the benefit of researchers and collectors and the historical record. Eleanor Marsh found out 2 days later. The first contact was polite. An email from her attorney explaining that Miss Marsh had become aware that a vehicle formerly in her late husband's estate had been sold in error by the estate liquidation company, and that she would like to discuss remediation. Joel read it, wrote a 2-sentence reply explaining that the sale had been lawful and the title transferred properly, and went back to work. The second contact was less polite. A different attorney. Language about disputed provenance and estate claims and the possibility of injunctive relief. Joel forwarded the email to a lawyer in Columbus who had handled a similar situation for the registry 8 years ago, and went back to work. The third contact was Eleanor Marsh herself. She came to the house on a Wednesday afternoon in a car that cost more than the median Granville home. She knocked. Joel answered. She introduced herself, looked past him at the garage, and said she would like to speak with him privately about the Ferrari. He invited her onto the porch. Cora was at school. Eleanor Marsh was 63, silver-haired, composed in the way of someone who had run companies and won. She spoke directly. She said the liquidator had acted without her knowledge. She said she had not known the car was in the carriage house. She said that if she had known, she never would have allowed it to be sold. She said the car had belonged to her husband for 30 years, and she wanted it back. She named a number. It was a fair number. It was probably a generous number. Joel listened to all of it. "Miss Marsh," he said, "your estate attorney signed the transfer documentation. Your liquidator listed the vehicle and accepted payment. The title is clean. I have everything in order. I understand that legally—" "I'm not talking about legally," he said. "I'm telling you what happened. You owned that car for 4 years after Robert died. Nobody in your organization knew it was there. Nobody checked." He looked at her steadily. It was in a carriage house 40 feet from the main house. The composure didn't break, but something behind it adjusted. "I know," she said. It came out quieter than the rest. "I'm not selling it to you," Joel said. She looked at him. "There's a museum in Columbus. Classic and historic automobiles, free admission, education programs for schools. I've been in conversation with them for 6 weeks." He looked at the garage. "The car will be donated. Fully authenticated, complete provenance documentation, restored to the standard it deserves. Robert's ownership will be part of the permanent record. The plaque will have his name on it." Eleanor was very still. "The name of the collection," Joel said, "is up to the museum. But I told them about Robert, about the 1989 auction in California, about the 30 years. He paused. "They said they'd like to honor that." She looked at the garage for a long moment, at the car visible through the window. At the tool cabinet beside it, with a child's drawing taped to the side, Cora's, from last December, a red car with the word Rosso written above it in careful capital letters. When she turned back to Joel, something in her face had changed. Not defeat exactly, something closer to recognition. He loved that car, she said. I know, Joel said. It shows in how it was stored. It was covered. Climate wasn't controlled, but someone covered it. She nodded once. Small, thank you, she said, for the provenance, for the documentation. She stood. I'll contact the museum about the naming. She drove away. Joel watched until the car disappeared down the county road, and the sound of the engine faded into the ordinary afternoon. He stood on the porch a moment longer, with his hands in his pockets, thinking about the carriage house and the canvas tarp, and the liquidator who had shrugged and said 800 because he needed it gone. He thought about the 11 years he'd spent at the registry, putting his hands on rare cars in climate-controlled showrooms and estate garages and shipping containers, learning to read what they were from 20 feet away. He had not expected to use any of that when he drove 90 minutes to Granville for a machinist's tool set. Some days the work found you. Cora came home from school an hour later and dropped her backpack in the hall and went immediately to the garage window the way she always did, pressing her face to the glass. Rosso's still here, she said. For a little while longer. Then the museum? Then the museum. She pressed her palm flat against the glass, fogging it slightly. Can we visit it? Anytime we want, he said. That's the point. She turned around and looked at him with the directness she'd had since she was 3. Daddy, what would have happened to it if you hadn't gone to that sale? He thought about the carriage house, the canvas tarp, the orange-vested liquidator who needed it gone by end of day. Someone would have bought it for the parts, he said. Or no one would have bought it at all. Cora looked back through the glass. It's lucky you know things, she said. He put his hand on her shoulder. Yeah, baby, he said. Sometimes it is. The museum opening was on a Sunday in June. The 275 GTB/4 sat on a low platform under warm gallery light, chassis number visible, provenance card beside it. Robert Marsh, it read. Acquired 1989. Donated in perpetuity by Joel Price, Granville, Ohio. Cora stood in front of it in her good dress and looked at it for a long time. It looks different in here, she said. It's where it belongs, Joel said. She took his hand. They stood there together while people moved around them, stopping, reading, reaching toward the velvet rope and pulling their hands back. The car that had cost $800 sat in the light and let itself be seen. That was enough.